Hey everybody, I'm Luke Davis, and today I want to walk you through a little bit of the basics of FL Studio. So I would say the first thing to know about FL Studio is this right here is the channel rack, and the channel rack is where you basically load your instruments and then you can play something pretty much immediately. As an example of something you could play, a flex instrument. So if you load up a flex, you can find flex in the browser here, and it's going to be on your synth classics. So you'll find your synth classics in the generators, and you'll find the generators in your plugin database. So that's right under your current project on the all section of the browser. You've got all, you've got your project specific things, you've got plugins. You can just go to plugins as well, and from plugins you'll see the plugin database, and then the synth classic, you'll see synth special, and you'll see a bunch of other stuff here. These are all of your different instruments that you have as VST3s, VSTs, fruity stuff. Pretty much everything will be here. Then you've got some presets here in the browser. You'll also have the cloud, and the cloud basically allows you to get a bunch of different sounds. Not all of them are something you can just get and drag in. Some of them you're going to have to pay for if you want to do that. Finally, you have your starred part of the browser, and the starred section is going to have your favorite instruments, just like mine does. If you haven't favorited an instrument, you see this little star here. All you got to do is hover over that star and click it, and then that's going to be a favorite instrument. You can come over here. This is Fruity DX10. And you would find Fruity DX10, yeah, right here. I don't really want that starred. If you don't want it starred, then you can just unstar it, and it'll disappear from your browser instantly there in the starred section. Or, of course, you could also unstar it from here. Either way works. In this case, we'll start with the flex instrument, and let's just start by trying to explore some basic sounds. Say you like a sound in the Flex library, you can also star it so that you know, hey, I really like that one. I liked the Gentle Force and Fairy Sparkle, so I could like these. Next, I would say we have the mixers over here. Now, by default, everything lands on the master mix, so whenever I hit a note here, you'll see that that note is triggered both here and down here and here. Everywhere where the volume kind of shows that the instrument is being played. Now, if we take the master then and we use this slider here, this controls the volume, we can pull the volume down to 0 and we won't hear the instrument at all. We can also make the instrument louder. So that's pretty cool. Let's just take for a moment and change the instrument to something a little bit more dry. Let's try viola pizzicato. Pretty dry. The beauty of this is we can actually test some effects on this. For example, one of the effects that we might add, can add those over here on the right section of the mixer. We've got 10 different slots for the master, 10 different slots for every insert. One of the things we can do with the inserts is if we don't have enough slots, we can just take the insert 1 and put it directly instead of to the master, link it to insert 2, and then insert 2 we link to the master. That would give us 20 total slots to work with before the sound is totally processed. So if I click the note here, it shows up on insert 1, insert 2, and the master insert. If I just had the insert 1 directly linked to the master, then it's just going to show on insert 1 and the master. And if I have insert 1 without it being linked into the master, I can hit that sound and it shows on insert 1, but it doesn't go anywhere because it's not attached to the master. So if the ultimate sound isn't attached into the master, you're not going to hear it at all. Now, let's practice a little bit of adding some different effects. For example, because this is a dry sound, meaning it doesn't have any reverb, it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of space around it, you could go to the slot, the first slot, and select a plugin. Now they've got a bunch of plugins for you to choose from here. There's more plugins you can choose from here. You can use the plugin database. But In this case, I'm just looking for reverb, which we'll find under the delay reverb section. Fruity Reverb 2. As we adjust the wet, the sound begins to sound a little bit more like it's maybe even submerged underwater. And as we increase the decay, a tail begins to form underneath that note. If we increase the decay and the wet, just by disabling this reverb, which we can do by clicking on this green button over here, or re-enabling it, we can see what a difference adding a fruity reverb can make to the quality of a sound. So those are some of the different things we can do as far as adding reverb. Another effect that we could probably add to this would be, if we wanted to, we could add a filter. And the filter would allow us to quickly adjust how much of the note's really getting through. That's going to be more obvious if we're using a rougher synth sound, so let's see if we can find something like that. Nasal charge here is going to be a perfect sound for demonstrating this. Another thing that we could try and add to this, an EQ. Understand what the shape is behind the wave and then modify that shape as you'd like. For example, we get a very high end here. We could essentially do the same thing as a Fruity Filter's doing by cutting certain frequencies using a 3018 hertz cut. And then just adjusting this. We don't want to cut necessarily too much, but a little bit of those high sounds. In the Flex library itself, we could also adjust the pitch. We could bring the pitch down, say 12 decibels or even 24. Say we added ourselves a second EQ over the top of this, as sometimes I think it's nice to do. These come useful across pretty much every instrument, especially vocals if you're trying to work with the human voice. So far we've just been playing with the notes themselves using a keyboard. First, let's go back to an instrument that we actually like, Fairy Sparkle. I will add back a reverb to this instrument. Increase the decay and the wetness slightly. Then up here we can see there's a piano roll button. If we click this piano roll button, now we have a piano roll. We can place notes into the piano roll by left clicking the mouse. We can also right click the mouse in order to delete notes. There are a bunch of different, let me go in here to my notepad, a bunch of different shortcuts we can go over. So firstly there's Control plus left click, and you would use that in order to select many notes at the same time. I always am using that. Another thing I like to use is Control copy. So if I hit Control C, that's for copy. Control V is for paste. And that allows you to quickly lay out a framework of notes that you want to use. Again, select everything, copy, and paste. So you can see how that would come in very useful. You can also use Control L in order to make legato notes. This is especially interesting whenever you've got different rhythms Say our rhythm looked something like this, and then of course I'll just go ahead and show you a different command, which would be Shift D. Shift D makes these things align with the smallest possible snap size to the nearest unit. And so if you use that, it'll make these things really small, but it depends on your snap size. If you come up here to the piano roll options and you look at the snap settings, right now we are at 1/3 steps. If I'm on step size and click Shift D, each of these notes now are 1 step long. The Control L is a legato button that will essentially make each of the notes come to the next note without overlapping, so you won't wind up with any of this where each of the notes is kind of overlapping the other. Then you've got Alt. Alt allows you to quickly perform micro adjustments on note length. So say that you had this here and you were trying to adjust it. Holding down Alt allows you to do that, where otherwise as you pull this note it's just going to align with the nearest snap setting. Right Shift to adjust the scale of many notes. So whenever you're holding all of these notes and you wanted to adjust them, say, so that this fits here instead, now we can do that holding Right Shift. Otherwise, something very different happens. If I'm not holding Right Shift and I try the same thing, now the notes are just going to get longer or shorter as I drag them, even if they're all selected. Next, we've got Delete. The Delete button can be used to delete a bunch of notes, or if you highlight the ones you want deleted, you can delete just those by hitting Delete. Now let's try and build something out here, just something super basic. Let's take a listen to this. We can right click and duplicate this. So now instead of having just one flex instrument, we'll have 2 flex instruments. And then we can change what this instrument is in the presets. We take this loop mode button right here, click that, and then click the bar button. This will now loop at the bar, meaning if we take another instrument like this one and we put more notes down, but it also gives you kind of a shadow of what's going to appear here. Kind of gives you an idea of what you're wanting to do next. I would like to take the gentle force instrument, change it for something else. We could try adding an arpeggio. We are. Great. Let's say that the instruments are becoming a little too much for you and you want to have a little bit more control over when and where they come in.
Huh?
So let's go into the next portion of this so that I can show you the first way that you can do this. Got a bunch of instruments open. Let's close our clutter here. We've got the channel rack, which shows you your instruments. We've got the piano roll, which shows you your notes. And we've got the playlist. Up here, whenever we're looking at the playback, right, of whatever we're working on, we can switch between looking at the pattern. This is a pattern that shows in your piano roll, and this is the song, which shows in your actual arrangement. If we drag this pattern out here, we'll be able to hear it in the song. If we modify it by shortening it, then it cuts off at the nearest point possible. If that happens to be halfway into a bar, it still cuts off. If we right click here, we've got several different things we can do with this. Renaming and coloring your pattern so that you can kind of keep track of what this is. Say we call this synth classic, and then we color it a color that feels right, like say red. Now we know what we're looking at, and if we needed a second pattern, we might name it differently and color it differently. If we right click this, the other thing we can do is we can clone this, and that allows us to mess with or alter the state of specific notes within the next pattern, which is really cool. You can also delete something if we don't need it, or we can split something into different channels like that. So now we've got the fairy sparkle, the muted statement, and the metal butterfly all on their own patterns. Now, one of the things that you can do with this is actually arrange things. So say we wanted to start with just the metal butterfly. Well, let's take this metal butterfly for a moment and say that we wanted the ability to fade out the volume on this completely. We could right click on the volume knob, which is this one. This is a panning knob. This is a volume knob. Panning just means that all of the sound can be directed to one or the other, so I'll show you that very quickly. 100% on the left side, 100% to the right side. Center. Now, let's take the volume knob, and right-clicking that allows us to link it to a controller, so this would give you continuous control over the position of the volume at any point, or to create an automation clip. That's the first method I want to look at, is creating an automation clip. By creating an automation clip for the volume, we can come into here and modify this by right-clicking to add a point, and then modifying what that point looks like, or where it appears. Then, throughout the course of the song, so if you have a continuous controller, which some people might not, then you can use your continuous controller by trying to link to the controller. You right click on the volume knob, link to controller, and use your controller to control that wheel at every point. Then you make sure that what you're recording is automation and notes, and you begin to record in the pattern specifically. So as you record in the pattern, now if we look in the control, we can see that we have pattern control for the channel volume of Fairy Sparkle. And that's what this looks like. Automation by hand using nothing but a mouse. So for that, edit events. And then we can go in here and kind of just set the events. Then we can come here and edit those events for the muted statement all across the entire thing. Again, in pattern mode. If you need a smoother control, you can use the Alt button to get that much finer control. And using different volumes, we can mix these together in a way that somehow feels more natural, even though it's synthetic, just by manipulating the volume properties of these different instruments. One of these we're using an automation clip, the other we're just editing the events by hand, and the other we're editing the events using a controller. So those are the different methods. Okay, let's go ahead and start over here. I just wanted to quickly show how that was done. You also have the ability to use third-party plugins using FL Studio. Over here, we've got a third-party plugin called Contact. Contact allows third-party softwares to upload different music instruments using their software, and then they can be accessed through any digital audio workstation that is compatible with the Contact player. So in here we've got a ton of different instruments. You can get pretty much any instrument you want. They've got some free orchestra instruments you can use here. So I'll demonstrate some of the free orchestra instruments that literally anybody could use, like the free orchestra. If we load into the free orchestra, power strikes, short strings. Let's try the short strings out. As far as this goes, you don't always have to mess with volume specifically. You can also mess with something called velocity, which is how quickly something like a staccato note hits, or with how much strength. It's a lot like volume, but it controls a sort of a different quality than the volume of the overall instrument. Now, we've created an underlying rhythm. We can also change the color of our notes. That is the beauty of both velocity control and changing the colors, so you can kind of tell what's going on with a melody and where it's all happening. Now the thing is, we've got a couple different instruments here, and they sound really cool. Our first one is basically a string short. So we can name it short strings. And then we can give it a color. Blue feels like the color of short strings, so we'll give it the name short strings. The next name for this second instrument would be bombastic bass, a reddish color. Bombastic bass. And funnily enough, this gives us a chance to use Alt-C in order to change all the color. First, we select the color we want, we highlight all the notes, and then we click Alt-C, and it changes their color. We'll use the tutti crescendo instrument. We'll try the haunting horns. We'll try the building an empire instrument. Alright, now that tends to try and take up way too much space, in my opinion. Alright, so that's just kind of an example of how you could make something using those basic free instruments. And again, keeping track of these different things and being able to apply different effects to all of them is super useful. Let's try and go through all of these one by one and listen. If we have this on mixer 1, we could add a little bit of reverb to it. For the bombastic bass, mixer 2, and then let's do this. Let's try and add an EQ to it. Okay, next, tongue-in-cheek, fresh air, to make it really stand out in certain places. Next up, alright, now we can try and put all of the instruments back together. You know, if one thing specifically is standing out to you a little too much, it's a tongue-in-cheek, for example. Okay, so that's how you can make stuff, and we've just spent a few minutes kind of tweaking values and stuff, getting everything ready to work with. We also have all of these inserts that are kind of confusing. One of the things I would say is really, really useful whenever you're making music is, especially with FL Studio, keep everything well labeled. That way you're not confused as to what it is that you're working with. Alright, another thing that's probably worth noting here is that you can control different things like drums if you wanted to using these little buttons. You can layer that hi-hat with a secondary hi-hat. So the point is you can make different rhythms pretty easy with this if that's what you're trying to do. It's not my bag, but it can be done. Now, one thing that's worth noting is that setting this up every single time, you know, coloring everything to look the same, can be a job, which is why there's such a thing as presets. To make a preset, what you do is you go to File, and then you save as template, which is here, and then you click that, and you enter a template name, and you're done. An example of a template is if I went to New from Template, I have some of the templates I've made in the past here. Starter template, tropical starter, basic recording preset, and orchestral template. The orchestral template, quite a lot of instruments. There's a total of 21 instruments ready to go here. There are violins legato, violas legato, bass legato, and then there's staccato bass, violas, and violins. So that makes up a string section. We can find the strings isolated right here. Likewise, we can isolate woodwinds. The woodwinds include oboes, bassoons, flutes, and piccolo. And of course, all of these are just the default kind of legato or sustain, but they're not staccato. You can, of course, add more of those instruments if you want. This is just to get you started. And of course, you can change the articulations in each of these as well if you want to do something like that. Then I would suggest having a percussion set of instruments, which in this case is going to be bass drums, glockenspiel, field drum, and a timpani. Then there's some miscellaneous instruments, piano, celeste, harp, and there's also choir. Then there's brass instruments, horns, trombones, and tuba. And if you have those, that's pretty much enough to get you started in most orchestral music. Now, what else would I recommend? Let me go to a new project so that I can show you. Other instruments, if you're interested less in specifically orchestral music and more in some folky kinds of variations of music, and sometimes it's nice to throw those kinds of folky touches into different things, like for example, you might throw that into an orchestral track. You can use Opus. Opus has a banjo in it that's really good. So if I search for the banjo right here, the banjo neck is really cool, and it's got a good sound. Let me just show that off for real quick. I'm gonna create something in the piano roll here. As an example of some banjo, you could do something like that. Let's take a listen to this. Keyboard mode. Of course, you can also use something like the strummer here. If I set that to 1/8 quantize, 4/4 signature, probably 120 beats. Let's listen to this. So it's got a strum engine, it's got, its own sort of a piano roll thing, and I never learned how to use it in its entirety. It's a very complex plugin. If you want a simpler sort of a guitar, the Acoustic Sunburst Deluxe, built-in voicing. You could also go with a second voicing like the Voicing 2. The third voicing. And of course you could just turn the voicings off. And then you can do something, I guess, a little bit different, like a basic C. Of course, they've got different patterns that you can use here. You can kind of create your own patterns too, I think, with a rhythm search. So you could do just the most basic sort of rhythm. Sounds something like this, maybe. So they've got that, which is also pretty cool, I would say. can definitely be useful. Also, they let you play it much more in a melody style. Now, it doesn't have a lot of reverb or anything on it. Again, this is another reason why just being able to add reverb yourself in the mixer is kind of important if you wanted to have kind of a longer lasting dying out, fading out sound. You can add high amounts of decay, a little bit of wetness. Thing is, if you play it wrong, it's going to sound a lot more like an actual piano, so be aware of that. Next up, I would say engine player. Engine player is where you'll find a little bit more Celtic instruments if you wanted to look for something like that. And there's a lot of good ones here. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but here's the total list. You've got your winds, which are flutes, pipes, you've got Irish bouzouki, you've got even some strummed options there for that, fiddle, you've got Celtic zither, you've got Celtic harps, acoustic guitars. Out of these, some of the ones that I wind up using sometimes are the Celtic strings. Take a listen. As you can tell, it's got a very high pad sort of sound. It's got good strings, you know. Anyways, it is supposed to be sort of an ambience sound. All of these soundscapes mostly are. Let's take a look at one more. Island Echoes. Alright, let's take a look at the Celtic harp. It's got a lot more reverb on it than normal because I forgot to turn this reverb off. One thing to note about the Celtic era library is that somehow or another it seems to be off from the other libraries. Like if I click a C note in the other library, let's take a listen over here. If I click a C note here with the violins, we'll go staccato. That's what it sounds like in the engine player. Very different sound. So if we want the engine player to match with most libraries, what we wind up having to do is we have to use a pitch shifter. I have this KHS pitch shifter, and the right place to put this is at 2 1/2 decibels up. Now, you would also want to turn the grain size down. The smaller the snippet's probably going to be better. I guess whenever they created the Celtic Era 2 library, they figured having it off by 2.5 decibels would somehow create a unique sound, and it definitely does. But it's not necessarily useful whenever you're trying to combine libraries, so that would be a critique I have of the Celtic Era 2 library. Let's take a look at something else that they have in here. They've got the Irish bouzouki, and if we use the Irish bouzouki, we can go. Okay, so you can do stuff like that with the bouzouki. Let's also listen to Galatian bagpipe, and we'll see what that sounds like. flutes. You've also got flutes like you've got this folk tin whistle. All in all, Celtic Era 2's got some really cool different instruments. I just wanted to show those off real quick. And with that said, that's kind of a wrap on the basics of FL Studio. We won't get into creating anything with it today other than just what we've already done here, which is just put together a basic list of just the different things that you can do with FL Studio in general. There's a lot there. And if anything needs clarification, let me know. And if you like the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll continue trying to make more content like this. Alright, till later. Peace.